Hello, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the webinar today. And today we are going to discuss a really exciting topic, and I think pretty much pertinent for all kinds of people out there in the workplace, and that is solving barriers to create inclusive workplaces. So I'm really excited to welcome our guest for today. So we have Vajiha Atiq. She's the Associate Director at Careem, Pakistan. She has been a manager, organizational development at Khadi, Pakistan, and also worked in notable organizations such as HUPCO, Coca-Cola, and British American Tobacco. So we're very excited to welcome you, Vajiha, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for having me. When you reached out to me about this exciting topic, I was like so excited to be on the talk with you, discuss the opportunities and challenges that we face around inclusion and diversity within Pakistan. So let's get this started.
Great. So, just to quickly introduce the topic. So, today's topic, I believe, is very important, uh, not just for women, because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the first thing that comes to mind is creating inclusive workplaces for both of the genders. But we also want to, have develop a broader understanding of what diversity and inclusion actually means. So just quick shed a quick like spotlight on the topic. I mean, we can interpret diversity in terms of gender diversity, personality diversity, neurodiversity, diversity in your physical orientation. So there are different ways of like interpreting diversity, and there are also different ways of actually creating more diverse and inclusive workplaces. So before I go into further detail, I think I would like Wajiha to share some of her insights, and let's, I think, define what it truly means in the local context to create inclusive workplaces and what does inclusivity actually means. So, Wajiha, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha. So, when we talk about diversity and when we talk about inclusion, I think it's really important to understand that one cannot exist without the other. Because if we are just talking about diversity and talking about creating workspaces where we have people of not just different genders, but people of different neurological differences, people who have different opinions, people who are brought up differently from each other, um, all of those different kinds of people cannot exist in an organization and thrive in an organization until we create an inclusive work environment. So inclusion is something which I think most of the times organizations, specifically in the local context, they miss out a lot on, because our activities when it comes to D&I mainly include let's hire more of these diverse people. And also when we're talking about diverse people, we're mainly talking about gender diversity in a Pakistani context. We're only talking about let's hire more women, let's hire more females. But at the same time, we don't to do anything in the end to ensure that they're able to grow, that they have an equitable work environment as well. So I believe personally that in the Pakistani context, we have to really look beyond gender diversity, number one. Number two, we have to look beyond just hiring people of different diverse backgrounds. And then number three, we have to also look at creating inclusive spaces for them within the organization, which cannot happen on its own. And there has to be a strategic mindset behind it in order to enable inclusion in the organization. And that also can only happen if you have equitable work environment or equitable opportunities for people within the organization. So I think one without the other cannot really be a success story. A success story will only be when we are not just looking at diversity, but we're also looking at inclusion and equity within the organization.
Thanks, Vajia. So, just to build upon what you earlier mentioned, that it is very true that diversity inclusion, these two words go hand in hand with each other. And I think some areas of so you mentioned, like, having people from different backgrounds. I mean, that's also diversity. Similarly, having people of different personality types, you have a blend of, for example, extroverts and introverts, or hiring people with disability, for example, somebody is visually impaired or can't hear properly, so these are all different ways we can promote diverse workplaces. And I think one of the common ways in which we fail to create diverse workplaces is when we tend of concentrating people of similar types in terms of their backgrounds, and in terms of the universities they come from, in terms of the way they carry themselves, in terms of the way they look. I mean, we tend to like hire similar sort of people, and we end up excluding a large number of people who probably might be equally talented, but because of biases or stereotypes, they somehow miss getting inside the organization. So that being said, so what do you think that in terms of the indicators of inclusive workplaces you mentioned earlier, uh, what are the barriers in establishing diverse and inclusive workplaces, especially in the local context? In your experience, what challenges have you come across?
I think that's a very good question because when we talk about the local context, then we're not just we're dealing with a lot of different barriers in the local context, right? Because we as a country, we are mainly Pakistanis. We have very few people in most of our workplaces, very few people who are from different nationalities. We are mainly like from one kind of religious sect. We're mainly Muslims. So there's like in our brought up as well, there's not enough opportunity for us to deal with many different kinds of people from our childhood to until we get to a workplace. Also, at the same time, we also have a very in Pakistan, depending on where you are, anybody can feel not included. So, for example, I as a person who belongs to Islamabad, understands Punjabi, understands English and Urdu. If I go to Balochistan and work there, I will feel as somebody who's the minority over there because I don't understand the language, I don't understand the culture, I don't understand anything. Similarly, if I go to Peshawar, I will again feel like somebody who's a minority over there because I don't understand the language, the cultural norms, any of those things. So in Pakistan, that's a really, I think, interesting thing that depending on where you are, you can be a part of the majority or you can be a part of the minority, and that I think is a lens that we miss most of the time. We most of the times look at situations and people and organizations from our own lived experiences and not from where they are coming from. So some of the barriers I feel that we face overall is number one, not being able to have these different lenses where we can look at people and be like, okay, this person is not like me. They're different, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. We all are brought up differently. We all have different beliefs. We all have different um, opportunities that were available to us. We all have different options that have available to us for our future as well. So I think that's one of the barriers. The second barrier I think is that like I mentioned previously, in our brought up, there's not enough, since there's not enough opportunity to learn about different kinds of people or diverse kinds of people that exist in the world. We always carry forward this single lens, and in the organization that shows up a lot. Like in Pakistan, it's one of those countries that it's still okay for hiring managers and for recruiters to ask questions like, okay, are you married? When will you get married in interviews? Like this is a question that still comes up. What is your age? Do you have kids? Like all of these questions, which are now illegal in most of the countries, are still being asked in Pakistan, and that shows that we don't think that these are questions which would make the other person feel included, excluded. These are the questions that might feel make the other person feel uncomfortable, etc. Another thing that you mentioned, Aisha, was different kinds of personality types. It's natural for people to find affinity or feel affinity for people who are similar to them. Like for example, an extrovert might sync more with an extrovert, and somebody who's from a certain university might have a preference for another person who's from the same university. But we don't have any kind of training mechanisms in most organizations to deal with these unconscious biases. I think that's another big barrier because society at large is not dealing with these unconscious biases, I think it's the organization's responsibility to then educate their people that these are the biases that might exist. These are your cognitive unconscious biases which might show up in your decision making. So you have to be aware of them when you're hiring people. You have to be aware of them when you're recruiting, when you're promoting, when you're doing the performance management of your colleagues. But I think at this stage in Pakistan, such trainings and such kind of thinking only exists in MNC organizations, but not really in local context or local organizations. Finally, I think there's also a lot of physical barriers to inclusion that exist in organizations. For example, an organization which wants to hire females and wants to create a diverse workforce, first thing that they have to face is how will those females get to work? They have to first arrange pick and drop for them, right? Because it's not safe for women to be on the road using public transport, and not everybody has their own car in which they can come to office, right? So that's a physical barrier of being able to create a diverse and an inclusive workforce. Similarly, if they get in the organization, then like we need a separate prayer room, we need a separate restroom or a break room for them. That is again a physical barrier which most organizations are able to solve for, but some organizations might not have the resources to solve for things like that. Also, if a woman is in coming to office, then and if she has a kid, and you have a head count above 70, you're legally required to actually have a daycare on site and in your facility. That's again a big investment which most organizations might not be willing to do. So that's why these physical barriers in the end, if we talk about differently abled people, then there's like a whole different set of legally required accessibilities that you have to provide, like a washroom, accessible washroom, like a ramp to enter the office, to leave the office, all of these things, which are costly, which take time, which take investment, which take, number one, from the beginning, leadership commitment. So I think a lot of the times these physical, mental, cognitive, economic, social barriers are what stop local organizations from, number one, approaching diversity as a topic that they should be strategically paying attention to. And if they do end up approaching these topics, they don't they hire the people, then they don't invest in doing the things which will enable those people to succeed in an organization.
Thank you, Vajiha. I think that was super insightful. I also think that at the bottom line, what really holds us back is a value system or is a belief system, and as you mentioned, or unconscious biases, or as in social psychology they call heuristics, the mental
Yeah.
shortcuts used to take decisions. For example, oh, if somebody is black, so we immediately assume a certain set of personal characteristics that go along with that person. They're, like, for example, not trustworthy, uh, they're likely to like deceive and all of those things, rather than actually bypassing those heuristics and objectively evaluating. And I think one of the uh, biases, or you can say, sorry, one of ways of looking at diversity especially in Pakistan, is also in terms of age and physical appearance. So for some reason there is this belief that for that older people, people with gray hair, they're like more wiser, and younger people, they're like not good enough. And somewhere along the line, when it comes to assigning value or rewarding value, these kind of biases also come into play. And I think that's pretty much true for a lot of like local organizations out there. Although in other countries, especially if you look across Europe, US, Canada, uh, while these things, it's not that they don't exist, but the impact is significantly lower in terms of how workplaces are organized. Another point that I think I would like to also highlight is that, so we have these uh, mental barriers, which prevent the promotion of diverse and inclusive workplaces. But somewhere deep down, it's also about how much value we place on the diverse workforce that we bring in the organization. So for example, let's say that I believe that women bring as much value to the workplace as men do. So if that is my belief system, then I will obviously make the investments to make sure that women are accommodated. But if I believe that somehow women add less value to work as compared to men, so I will not make the necessary effort required to make them adjusted. And I think that is just not for men and women. I think that's also for neurodiverse people. So for example, somebody has some sort of a disability and we feel that the person is not able to add value to the organization, we are unlikely to sort of make adjustments for them. So I think it boils down deeper down to our perception of value, and how we perceive such kind of people basically. So that being said, I
Yeah.
think that brings me to another really really important question.
I actually want to make a comment on the age bias that you mentioned. This was actually something that I faced myself during my career somewhere 5, 6 years ago. And the thinking at that point from the management was that a CEO can only be at a certain age, right? So a CEO has to be above 40. They, of course, they didn't mention the gender, but it was very clear that the age cannot be less than 40 for a CEO. And at that point in time, I think I was rooting for my own promotion, trying to get a senior manager level role. And the only objection the entire organization had was, if you become a senior manager right now, then your path to a CEO is like only 10 years, right? And that's not, by that time, you will be less than 40, and no CEO can be less than 40 in terms of age. So age is just, I think, um, in traditional organizations, there is a lot of thinking around age-related barriers. There's a lot of thinking around only people when they get a certain age, only then they will be able to handle different situations, etc. But I'm really glad to see that in modern organizations, and especially in the tech world, it's not even a consideration, right? It's not even something that's considered when making decisions about who will be leading an organization, who will be heading a certain department. It's only the experience and what they have done in those number of years of experience that matters. So thank you so much for bringing this point, because I think it still happens quite a bit in organizations.
That's very true, and I think you're not the only one who personally experienced that. I have also experienced it. I think like throughout, I think I still do, and my one standard response is that if I continue to look the same way for the past like 12 to 15 years, there's like nothing much that I can like do about it. So that is why too people are very quick to reach judgments and form conclusions just by looking at your physical appearance, and sometimes it's perceived age, by the way, because not everybody goes out and asks you, oh, how old are you, but it's just that how you look. They just make up a number in their
It's
head and they
different.
start
Yeah,
treating you accordingly, especially for when it comes to women at work.
yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So that being said, what do you think are the economic costs to businesses when they fail to promote inclusive workplace cultures? Because see, when we're talking about business, we need to look at it in terms of a cost and a benefit decision. At like while it's great to think about from a societal perspective that yes, these are the values that we aspire to, but businesses, when it comes to decision making, all businesses, they try to balance a cost versus benefit equation. So what do you
Yeah.
think are the costs of the failure to promote inclusive workplaces?
Um, I think a lot of the times businesses fail to acknowledge the value of having a diverse workforce. Because if you have a workforce where everybody is just the same, you're never going to innovate, right? You're never going to come up with ideas that are inclusive for your customers, because you, as an organization, are only have a certain group, which is the majority. And so you're only thinking from one lens. So the economic cost, however much intangible it may look like, it's actually quite a bit for organizations, especially for organizations which don't have women as senior leaders, especially for organizations which only have a certain kind of ethnic group as their leadership, who only have people from a certain university in their leadership. Um, Sorry, my cat is here, but yeah. So
That's
So, organizations like that who fail to be inclusive, not just in their workforce, but specifically be inclusive in their leadership positions, these organizations, I think, um, number one, they're unable to innovate when it comes to their products and services. They're unable to have a diverse group of customers as well. They only appeal to a certain kind of group of customers or a certain group of clients because they only are thinking about what they're offering, how they're offering from a certain mindset, and that only appeals to a few people, the group that actually identifies with them. But if you have an organization where you have a diverse leadership bench specifically, like this is one of the very important questions every time I meet an organization and they are talking to me about how diverse and how inclusive their workforce is. Like, first question that I always ask is, how many women do you have in leadership positions? And then the second question I ask is, what positions are those women on? Are they on like um enabling functions? Are they actually leading sales? Are they leading HR? What are they doing in the organization? Because a lot of the times, I think organizations also end up giving enabling function leadership position to women so that they have the diversity numbers in place, but at the end, they're not really able to make much of a difference. So the economic cost is really huge. I do think that organizations right now are really not, specifically in Pakistan. I wouldn't say talk about any MNC or any international organization or in any other country. I think in Pakistan, this is a something which CEOs, which founders are still to acknowledge that a diverse workforce is going to not only give them a great inclusive workplace, but it's also going to give them a really great product or service which will appeal to a broader audience, a broader customer base.
That is very rightly put, Vajiha, because uh, when you say not appealing to a diverse customer base, I've personally also experienced it when the mindset of the leadership is a very niche mindset, or you can say sometimes when they're coming from a boutique perspective, right? So they end up appealing to boutique customers only who are looking for something niche. Whereas if the mindset of the leadership and the workplace is like more diverse, they are able to cater to a wider variety of audience, deal with different mindsets, deal with different local cultures. So for example, the cultural contrast of, you go towards Punjab, the way people think, the way people organize their lives, it's very different from the way people do it, for example, in interior sin, right? So if you have that diversity in your workforce, you're obviously better able to understand how they're thinking, and align your product or service accordingly. And I think uh, so these days, I think since the past 6 months to 1 year, unfortunately, a lot of workplaces are facing severe retention issues in terms of talent supply. So we are noticing that a lot of talent is like moving out of Pakistan, especially quality profiles who are able to find jobs outside of Pakistan. Uh, and then there's, because of the rising inflationary pressures, a lot of people are also moving out from one job to another job as well. So retaining talent for a lot of organizations has become a challenge, because not all organizations operate like MNCs के वहाँ जहाँ सब कुछ दिया हुआ होता है, सारी facilities दी हुई होती हैं, and talent has no place to go because they know like कि इसके अलावा हम जाएं तो कहाँ जाएं. So I think
Even
in
MNCs are facing, by the way, this challenge of retention these days because it's not about what you have available in Pakistan. It is about just I want to leave the country. That's it. I think most
yeah.
of the time that's the objective for most people.
So I think MNC talent is like moving out of Pakistan, and talent from local organizations is either moving out of Pakistan or they're trying to switch to like better jobs can accommodate their needs better in these
Yeah.
difficult times. Basically, so in these times, if you come to think about it, and I recently wrote a post on my LinkedIn as well, that retaining people, for example, retaining women, for example, you're more likely to do that if you just have invest a little bit, and you invest in, for example, providing daycare services, or you invest in removing those barriers because of which women don't want to work, for example creating a separate prayer room, for example, and like more welcoming for and more harassment free workplaces. So I think if the employers invest in creating such kind of workplaces, I think they will find, especially women, they will find them more loyal, less likely to leave, because as a woman, if your child is being taken care of, you feel safe in an organization, you think that you have chances of progress, you're unlikely to leave. And given the
Yeah.
local context in Pakistan, usually it's a men who are taking these sort of decisions, because of the breadwinners, that okay, let's like relocate.
Hmm.
Women, while they do that, but उसकी जो percentage होती है वो कम होती है. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that businesses should be thinking this way?
Of creating diverse or inclusive workspaces so that they can retain colleagues. In short, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is not gender specific right now. I think it's even it's a if it is a woman or a man, most people right now have this objective of um, moving on from the country, or just plainly because the inflation is so high, just bettering their economic situation by working in an organization which pays well, which takes care of their expenses other than salary, like offering a, like you said, offering a daycare, provide some work-life balance, gives them a car or something like that. Like any benefits that they're offering is it's just more than salary than what is being offered. I also think this situation only exists because we have that many opportunities that people can move, right? So, and we have that many people in the country as well who can take these positions. So, I think the only thing that organizations need to do is to just number one, identify who those people are that they want to retain, right? Because every organization has a, I'm sure most organizations have a performance management system. First thing is to identify who those people are in the organization that they want to retain, because I'm sure not every, they don't want to retain every single person. They want to retain and focus on the top performers. And then provide those top performers with everything that they need, right? Everything that they need in order to stay in the organization, whether it is career progression, whether it is mentoring and coaching opportunities, whether it is better benefits, whether it is better rewards, whether it is flexible working hours. I think flexible working hours is one thing which most Pakistani organizations are not very comfortable with, because we still work in that colonial mindset that, okay, like 9 a.m. have to be in office and 6 p.m. is the off time, and before that you can't leave. But most multinational organizations have gotten moved away from that. They offer flexible working hours to women specifically, and women with kids specifically. So offering benefits like that is something that they can do to ensure that their top performers are going to stay in the organization, because at the end of the day, people are not essentially working for money. The motivation is always more than money. Money and money related concerns have to be off the table for other things to start mattering. If your salary is not able to meet your monthly expenses, then all you will care about is money. But if your salary is enough to comfortably meet your monthly expenses, then you will ask other questions like, when am I getting promoted? What is my next training that's going to happen? I have great colleagues that I work with. That is why I'm staying in the organization. And I feel that's where most of the disconnect is happening, where people think that people are just like leaving for money. People are not just leaving for money. People are leaving for more things than money.
Great. That is, I think, very true, and I think it resonates with Maslow's hierarchy. You if you're as long as you're locked in the survival mode, I think there won't be anything else that you'll be able to think about, and self-actualization is actually a long climb up. So since the objective was to actually identify barriers to creating diverse and inclusive workplaces, and then finding a turnaround or solutions to them. So if you were to like share 4 to 5 actionable items that companies can implement right away to at least start their journeys towards creating more diverse and equitable workplaces, what those be?
That's a very good question. I will actually refer back to some of the things that I've done in a few of my past organizations. Like every organization has a different journey, but a few things which have worked for me. Number one is don't just take your leadership's word for it that they want to create a diverse and inclusive organization. Like, don't just say, okay, our leadership is so committed to hiring females or so committed to hiring a diverse workforce. Um, Set objective targets for them and for yourself. If you don't have objective targets for them and for yourself, the commitment is just going to be like, okay, yes, we are all very committed to it, but nothing is going to happen. The only way things are going to happen is when you have objective targets for the leadership itself, like a target for the CEO. The entire organization has to be 10% gender diverse, or the entire organization has to be accessible to people with differently abled people by the end of XYZ year. Or the other way for this can be to align yourself with the global UN objectives for gender and diversity and just make sure that you're delivering on those objectives year on year. That's number one. Number two is I don't think that organizations should just think that hiring a diverse workforce is like the complete task in itself, and that's like they need to hire people and that's it. Hiring the diverse workforce is just the first step. This the thing which actually enables all these economic benefits, which enables the diversity of thought, which enables the innovation to thrive in the organization, is actually inclusion and equity. And inclusion and equity cannot happen until and unless people are trained on what it actually means. Everybody in the organization should have the same understanding of what it means to be
Well
an
said.
inclusive workplace and to be an equitable workplace. Because even if one person is not aligned to what it means for the organization to be an inclusive and equitable workplace, that person will make sure that everyone else feels that they're not aligned, right? And that will create a non-inclusive workforce. So I think training, and not just like classroom training where you sit everybody down and be like, it's very important for us to have a diverse workplace. That not that sort of training. Training where you actually question people's core beliefs, where you shake their core beliefs, you make them think. In my experience, the only way that works is when you have residential programs of like 3 or 5 days. You literally just 3 days, first 3 days, you spend breaking down their internal beliefs, and then next 2 days you tell them what is the approach that the company is going to take in future. And then thirdly, I think it's really important for organizations to acknowledge that an equitable workplace will only exist when organizations are able to acknowledge that not everybody has the same opportunities. So I see a question in comments as well, and I think somehow my this what I'm going to say will also answer that question. Is that when you look at different sets of or different groups of people in your organization, you have to acknowledge that not everybody has had the same opportunities throughout their lifetime, and not everybody will have same level of opportunities in future as well. And what that acknowledgement brings to the table is an understanding that sometimes certain groups will need more help in getting to the top. So, for example, women might need more mentoring and coaching opportunities than men to get to the top positions, right? So, how can women get to the board level positions? How can women get to the CEO level positions? You can't leave them on their own, right? You can't expect a woman to drive her own career and get to the CEO level position. Some women are able to do that, but if you want to be an inclusive organization, you have to have a program in place where you assign mentors and coaches to them, where you give them the opportunities through career progression, where you give them the opportunities through succession planning, where you give them the opportunities through training and development. And then they get to that level where they will eventually become the CEOs or the board members for any company. Because if you just believe that and the minority groups in an organization are going to somehow solve the barriers themselves and they're going to get to the top just because you hired them and you gave them an opportunity within the organization, that's not true. You have to create an equitable workplace by creating frameworks, creating systems, creating processes which will help those people to actually succeed. So these, I think, are the things which have worked in my experience. These are like some things which I have practically done in my past experience and current organization, and they have been extremely helpful.
So, when you say they've been extremely helpful, can you just share the impact in a few words?
Yeah. So one of the organizations where I worked, I'll start with like the first experience I had with having a DNI initiative. One of the organizations that I worked at, we had there was a lot of age difference in the organization. Like a lot of people were, everybody almost was above 40. Like I was one of the very few people who were in their 20s working in that organization. And when I started, I launched their first management trainee program. So a huge influx of like around 40, 50 management trainees, all of them in their 20s, joined the organization. And it soon became very clear to me that just hiring those people, that was like my first experience of hiring diverse workforce and then creating an inclusive workforce for them, workplace for them. So I had to come up with all of these different initiatives and programs to make sure that they did not feel like, oh my God, why are these people like, why do they work so differently? Oh my God, they write their emails with like, hey, they don't write dear sir in their email. Why are they always having these coffee breaks? Like, how do people understand that there's a completely different way of working for different age groups? Like, people above a certain age work in a very different way, and people below a certain age, they work in a very different way. For example, the differences that we feel in the organizations today with Gen Z coming in, we all feel that they work in a completely different way. But it's one thing to feel that there is a difference, and then it's another thing to acknowledge the difference and then do something about it to make them feel included and to work around that. So I was able to design a program for it, and the impact was so huge that those all of those management trainees were able to be successful in their career, get into permanent positions in future, and get promoted eventually. Another of the organizations that I worked at, I was the only, I think I was a third female in that office of 1,500 colleagues when I was hired. And by the time I left, the gender diversity in that office was around like 3% from 0.02%. And I was only able to do that because we started a daycare in that office. We were able to provide assistance to those colleagues in terms of pick and drop. We were able to provide assistance to those colleagues in terms of finding a home, renting an apartment, like anything that they needed, like all those external support that you needed to give those women so that they were willing to move, relocate to another city for their job. And then eventually we also saw a lot of those women progressing to like managerial levels over the next 5, 6 years because they had the opportunity to join the organization and then grow within the organization. So the impact at the end is always going to be having a workforce which is more diverse, more open-minded, more innovative because they're open to newer ideas. They challenge themselves. They're not just working in one way of thinking since eons. So, in my opinion, in my experience, creating inclusive workforces has a real impact on not just the economic outlook of the organization, but also what they offer, and how they deal with their customers as well.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, and the fact that you've implemented these initiatives and seen real-time results should provide a lot of validation and encouragement to all the professionals out there in the industry. That this is not some sort of fluff that you just talk about in conferences and then you dismiss, and you're unable to implement it in your day-to-day. The way you work basically, and the kind of initiatives that you lead. The impact of diversity and inclusion is real, it is tangible, and it reaches over like decades, and it spans over years, and it changes lives, not only for the people who are working within the organization, but I think it does transform the way the organization conducts itself in the market, and how it outshines its competition and its peers as well. uh, and and I can validate what you just said, because one of the previous organizations that I work for, I remember they were pretty much invested in getting diversity inclusion right from the beginning. And while they were still a growing name, after all of these years, I think they've emerged as a market leader. And the kind of talent that they have, that they breed or they're breeding, is a talent that companies now want to hire. And they say, okay, we want to hire employees from XYZ organization, because they know how to do things right. So the impact is like long term, and I think all that is required is like a vision and some
I think
far-sightedness
I completely
about
agree with you when you say that, sometimes an organization can have an impact not just on itself, but the entire ecosystem as well, right? So if an organization is doing what is right, training people, changing their thinking to be more inclusive, changing their thinking to be more open to diversity, to be more equitable, they will not just impact the people or the employees of that organization, they will make a real impact in the entire ecosystem, because everywhere where those colleagues go, where those employees go when they leave the organization, they will take that thinking with them and they will bring their difference within the new organization. They will go home and teach this to their kids, right? They will go home and tell their wives that this is something that we learned, and they will go home and tell their husbands that this is something that how organizations should be treating women. If the wife is facing some kind of discrimination or that is not is working in our organization which is not open or not inclusive, the husband who works in a much more inclusive or diverse organization will be able to guide her on how to navigate that as well. So I think the investment that organizations make in diversity and inclusion related initiatives, they have to think about it more than the investment that they're making in their organization. They have to think about it as an investment that they're making in the entire ecosystem, in the region, in the country. Like it's not a small feat to be able to change somebody's mindset, to be able to really make them think that they need to be an ally in this journey of creating more inclusive workspaces.
That's great. And that's very true. So I think we'll move towards Q&A. So one question that I would like to answer, to ask you, that has been brought up is, what are the best ways for organizations to tackle the challenge of lack of daycares in Pakistan, and what options do smaller organizations have in Pakistan? So what do you have to say?
Um, I don't understand what they mean by lack of daycares, because I'm a mom. I have a 2.5-year-old son. We do have a lot of daycares in Pakistan. Like I know in smaller cities they're fewer in number. I remember when I was working with one of the organizations in a smaller city in Pakistan, we did not have any daycares in that city. We had to actually open a daycare within office. By the way,
I
just for
think
your reference,
I
legally,
think what
sorry.
it means within office, daycares within office. So
So within
how?
office, we have, I was just going to shed some light on that. Within office, by the way, an organization which has 70 colleagues, 70 employees, that organization is legally required to have a daycare on site, right? So that organization anywhere in Pakistan, if you have 70 number of colleagues, you are legally required to have a daycare on site within your office facility. The option or the way to manage those daycares could be like something that we have also done in like a few of my previous organizations is to hire a vendor from daycares who will actually manage that daycare facility for you. So you don't have to do anything, you just have to provide the space to them, because daycares also have a daycare law in Pakistan. So you can't just put a room and put a crib in it and be like, okay, we have a daycare. That room has to follow certain guidelines. There is a certain square feet, certain number of kids who can be in that room. Number of attendants per kids is also defined by law. So we need to be very cognizant of what we are doing when we are opening a daycare in our facilities. So the best way to do that would be not to take that administrative responsibility upon yourself as HR or as admin, but it would be best to actually hire a vendor who manages daycares. There are a few really great vendors in Pakistan who manage these facilities for a lot of different corporate organizations. However, if your org size is really small, then I think the best way would be not to open a daycare on site, but to provide a daycare allowance to your colleagues where they can put their child in any daycare of their choice.
Fantastic. So I think that pretty much answers it. So with that, we'll be bringing the webinar to an end. Thank you so much, Vajiha.
Thank
Uh,
you.
it was great having this insightful conversation, and I'm sure it must have been a great learning experience for our viewers as well. So anything that you would like to say towards the end?
No, thank you so much for inviting me and getting me to talk about a topic which I'm so passionate about. Like it just like when I talk about this topic, it just comes naturally to me, and I feel, and I think as any, if you speak to any woman in a senior position in Pakistan, they will be very passionate about this topic because they have suffered through what it
Yeah.
feels like to not be in an inclusive workplace, and they have gotten to a point because they also had experienced inclusive workplaces in their career. So as just somebody who is working in this ecosystem, I feel very passionately about it, and I feel always feel that whatever opportunity I have to make sure that I can make a difference about diversity and inclusion in Pakistan in our ecosystem, I take that opportunity. So thank you, Aisha, for giving me this opportunity for asking really insightful questions and for helping the ecosystem evolve by this webinar.
No, it was my honor and pleasure as well. Similarly, as a woman in work, I'm also very passionate about this topic, and I believe that I think the more awareness we create, I still think it's still a drop in the ocean, and need to start having more dialogue and start talking about it more and start creating more awareness for some sort of policy action to actually be taken seriously. So, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Vajaya.
great. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.